What if Doctor Who wasn't axed in 1989? Since 2016, I've been exploring this concept, creating a detailed and rich alternate timeline, following each decision to the next through cause and effect, as well as a lot, and I mean a lot, of guesswork. Cold Front would have been the fourth major Doctor Who spin-off after Leftover, Rebel Zero and Panopticon. Earlier, in 2012, the Doctor died in the movie Doctor Who Endgame, and as a consequence, Doctor Who was announced to be going off the air until 2014, leaving Panopticon as the flagship Doctor Who show. Ivor Stephen Bear, the now de facto showrunner of the Doctor Who franchise, was looking to produce another spin-off to run alongside Panopticon and act as a secondary Who show, like Panopticon had once done. Together with Chris Carter, who had directed the first game and Checkmate, as well as previously being well known for showrunning The X-Files and Millennium, came up with the idea which would eventually become Cold Front. They wanted to make a new kind of Doctor Who spin-off show that could take the concept of Doctor Who and do it without the Doctor. Instead of having the Doctor and his companions travelling from story to story, place to place, they'd just have those stories, without the whole travelling. Each episode would be its own story, with its own characters set in the Doctor Who universe, or perhaps even multiverse. Many of these stories would be sequels or prequels to existing Doctor Who stories, featuring returning characters and telling new stories with them, or just tying up loose ends. The first series would last for just 5 episodes, however each episode would be 90 minutes long, which means you would essentially get 5 spin-off movies each series. As each episode could basically be the pilot episode for a spin-off, the show was nicknamed the spin-off of spin-offs. However, unlike pilot episodes for a series, a Cold Front episode would tell a whole story, beginning, middle and end, that was self-contained and wouldn't have the need for an actual series. As the series was an anthology show, the title sequence couldn't really be about anything as the show was so broad, so they chose to go with a simple title card. This marks the first Doctor Who show not to have any theme music, as the opening titles play with just sound effects. A different piece of music, however, would play over the last scene and into the credits, usually pop music, but it wasn't restricted to that. This piece of music would be referenced in a short melody played over the episode's title card, as you'll see. However, the biggest difference would be that it would be made mainly by just CBS. Now, Doctor Who has been a co-production with CBS since 2006, but it was produced by the BBC. However, this show was the other way round, for the most part. Some of the episodes, though, would have parts filmed in the UK, such as Episode 1, and this would be produced by the BBC and their production team would film it, but it would be edited up and then produced by CBS, with some, and the majority of filming actually being in America. This would mean that it would air on CBS in the US before the UK on BBC One, but it'd only be by one day. It's 6 weeks before the 2005 general election, and incumbent Prime Minister Alfred Lawson is struggling to gain the support he needs to secure another victory for the Labour Party. While he fights over control of his country, he also fights on a deeper level for control over his own body. This episode will be based around the 2005 general election, and more specifically on Prime Minister Alfred Lawson, played by Patrick Stewart, last seen in the Slovene two-parter in Leftover Series 2, set in 2002. Lawson was killed by a Slovene in that story and taken over by the end of the story. Katie Stillinger managed to get him to agree to turn good and continue the original Lawson's work. This episode picks up 3 years later, starting on the 24th of March 2005, 6 weeks before the general election. Lawson is the leader of the Labour Party, and his main opposition is the brand new leader of the Conservative Party, Angela Jensen. The story focuses, for its first 50 minutes, on 2 different arcs. Firstly, the election campaign between Lawson and Jensen, including a number of televised debates and also backroom arrangements, etc, etc, usual political TV stuff. And then secondly, and more interestingly, really, we focus on Lawson as he tries to navigate the creature within him, his Slovene self. We see flashbacks of Katie telling him to stay good, and you can really see him trying, but it is difficult for him. The stress, the guilt and the pain caused by what happened on the 16th of February 2002, and also just running the country, is a really hard job. All throughout the episode, we see Lawson continually playing with a pocket watch, one he's had as long as he can remember, and then, on election night, at midnight, Lawson opens it as Big Ben chimes 12. A burst of golden energy comes out of it and he changes suddenly. The results come in, and then David Dimbleby, playing himself, announces the Conservative Party have won their first victory since 1992, and Angela Jensen is the new Prime Minister. Angela makes her speech as Prime Minister, but it is crushed by Lawson, angrily stomping in and pushing her out the way. Sebastian tries to stop him, but Lawson just knocks him down. Lawson shouts and rages like a madman, and when someone says, "Mr. Lawson, please calm down," he replies with, "My name is Omega," and he snaps their neck. Not before long, a team of unit soldiers come in and chain him up and take him away. He's taken to a unit base and he's locked up in a high security cell, screaming, "I am Omega, Lord of all, you shall all bow before me." And then the episode ends, with Angela and Sebastian outside 10 Downing Street the next day, big smiles on their faces, watching the crowds. They take each other's hands and open the door and walk in. Close up on Angela's smiling face as she takes in the place, and then cut to end credits. So, it'd be retconned that Alfred Lawson from Series 2 of Leftover was the same character as Omega from the movie, but after escaping the antimatter universe after the events of Arc of Infinity, Omega took his original form and used a chameleon arch to turn himself human, and he became Alfred Lawson. It was only later in the events of Leftover that Lawson was then killed by Savine. However, here Omega is resurrected, takes the Lawson thus the Savine body, and goes a bit mad, leaving him with Unit till Omega is needed again, or will they just leave it? Over the final scene, the song Welcome Home would have been played, which led into the end credits, as Angela and Sebastian are walking around 10 Downing Street. As mentioned before, this was referenced in the opening titles. The episode would have taken place in the pre-Cold Star timeline, where Sebastian Jensen did exist, as this of course can be seen as a prequel to the Sly Lorraine Awakening, which was also in that timeline, not the Sebastian Jensen never existed timeline. In 3381, Exotrack 1, the first major space station, was constructed by the Beloshians. As a result, in 3382, they made first contact with the Poplin, and then in 3383, they were invaded. Now 30 years on, one young woman must fight the odds that are repeatedly thrown against her. In 3413, everything changed for Haim Armstrong. This episode acts as a prequel to No Sky in Space and focuses mainly around Sandra's mother, Haim Armstrong, and how she and her father met, and how the relationship also ended. It was set during the Poplin occupation of Bellons, which before now wasn't actually an established event. For the purposes of this episode, they decided to retcon a 40-year occupation by the Poplin of the Beloshians, whereas before it being only implied they were in the sort of Cold War. This episode would start with us seeing the construction of Exotrack 1, First Contact and the Poplin invasion, before jumping 30 years ahead. That's when we meet Haim Armstrong, played by Jessica Capshaw. She's a peasant living in a work camp controlled by the Poplin. She soon meets Duncan Armstrong, played by Rupert Graves, who's a human spy working for the Galactic Federation. Haim ends up helping him stay undercover and hidden from the Poplin, and over a period of 3-ish years, they fall in love. We see them both just falling for each other and being totally and completely in love. All the while they live in such an oppressive occupation, and Duncan spies for the Federation. We also hear Duncan telling Haim of a family legend, Jaina Armstrong. In late 3416, they get secretly married. However, Haim finds out on her wedding day that she's pregnant, but she doesn't want to complicate things on her and Duncan's special day, so she keeps quiet. 1 month later, Haim tells Duncan, and he's furious, mainly because Haim didn't tell him. But in the heat of the moment, he lashes out, and Haim gets a different impression that he just doesn't want the child. As Duncan walks away from the building Haim lives in, he is jumped by a couple of Poplin and arrested. They found him out. He is taken to Exotrack 1 to the superintendent of Bellons, a Poplin called Makoff. He is interrogated and tortured, but he doesn't give anything up. Over this period of months, while he's continually tortured, he reconsiders the thought of having a child, and he decides to fight for that child and make a better future for them. So he escapes his cell and sneaks into the core of the station and activates self-destruction, destroying the station, himself and every Poplin on it, including the superintendent. This of course sparks a rebellion which drives the Poplin off Bellons. This episode ends with Haim on the planet below looking to the sky and seeing the explosion. Then she looks down at her arms and we see a little baby girl. She speaks softly, "Don't be worried, Sandra. I'm here for you. I love you. I will never abandon you." And with that the episode ends. The music played for this episode would be Running Up That Hill by Kate Bush. Also in this episode, a young version of Fen Denell would have appeared, and we find out his first name is actually Jermaine Denell. Cordell has become the High Governor of Gallifrey since the invasion. She has been given a merciless task to occupy a planet so hell-bent against their captors. Not only does she need to keep them in order, but she also must begin the ascension of the population. Is she up to the job? This story picks up about a week after the end of Panopticon Series 5, and it really acts as a prequel for Series 6. It focuses mainly on Cordell and her new role as the High Governor of Gallifrey for the Vex Empire. It split it into 3 half-an-hour sections, each telling their own story, told in real time, and all 3 making one narrative together. In the first section, we see the immediate response Cordell must deal with. Firstly, 1/8 of the population were killed in the Battle of Gallifrey, and Will, Kendra and Francis have gone missing, but are all assumed by the Vex to have perished in the battle. The Hell and the rest of the Council are back in the Sereti dimension, the universe the Vex are from, leaving Cordell alone on Gallifrey with only a handful of normal Vex by her side. Also, the Seal of Rassilon has been banned, and anyone who showcases it or even possesses one is immediately vaporized, not even given the honour of ascension. We mainly focus on her response to an incident where an outsider managed to kill a Vex, while being transported to the main council chamber in an Exeter for ascension to Vex form. We get about half an hour of high drama as she uses her own willpower and intelligence to deal with the situation. The second section picks up 2 years later, and we find a remarkably different Gallifrey to the one we've just seen. For the Gallifreyans, all hope is lost. No longer do they have this fighting instinct against the Vex, they instead are just accepting them. Things aren't actually too bad. They live under Vex rules, which aren't too much worse than Gregori's actually, and they just await their time for ascension, living in constant fear, but they accept it. In this section, we deal with the Hell returning to Gallifrey for the first time since the Battle of Gallifrey and inspecting what Cordell has done. The inspection goes smoothly, however the Hell does multiple things Cordell doesn't agree with. She starts shooting random Gallifreyans just because she feels like it. She starts torturing random prisoners, and she changes the duty rota for the Vex working Ascension from 5 shifts a week to 8, which really annoys them. By the time she leaves, Cordell isn't happy, but there's nothing she can do as the Hell is in charge. The third and final section takes place another 5 years later in 3460, a whole 7 years after the end of Season 5. Gallifrey is in a pretty similar state to the one seen in the last section. However, everything is turned upside down when the Lexifor main council chamber, which is the head of operations for Ascension, is bombed in a terror attack. An organisation calling themselves the Seal claim responsibility. Cordell must deal with the aftermath of it, not only with the Council's 6, but also the Howl, who's not happy at all. She thinks Cordell has been too easy on the population, and she says she's going to come to Gallifrey herself and oversee things more on a permanent basis. Meanwhile, Cordell has to make sure that this doesn't start a revolution by ordering her guards to execute 200 random civilians from all over the planet in response. We end the episode with the camera panning down to the ground and then continuing underneath it for miles and miles until we get to a bunker. On the wall of the bunker is a giant Seal of Rassilon, and stood looking up to it is Will Adams. And he smiles. And that is where Panopticon Series 6 will start off from. The piece of music used in this episode is Bang Bang by Cher. Four years ago, Catherine Tullinger vanished, Donald Harcourt's most vivid love. Now it's 1917 and there's a war on. However, through all the fighting, Harcourt still can't let Catherine leave his mind, and the circumstances of her disappearance plague him. Donald Harcourt must know the truth, no matter the cost. This story focuses around Donald Harcourt, Katie's love interest from Leftover Series 3. We pick up 3 years later and he's a soldier fighting in Arras in World War I. We mainly focus on Donald's descent into madness from firstly shell shock during the Battle of Arras, and then he starts seeing visions of Katie. He's taken to a field hospital and they treat it as a normal shell shock case, but it's much more worse than that. Much worse. A private doctor, Dr. Chardlish, bribes the nurse at the hospitals and has Donald taken away to his private practice. Throughout the rest of the episode, Dr. Chardlish submits Donald to numerous different psychotherapies and more gruesome procedures, in torturing long sequences. And yet, all Donald can think of is Katie over and over again. All he will say is, "What's happened to my Catherine?" and "Where is she?" And then the episode ends with Donald in a padded cell, lying on the floor, looking up at what he sees as Katie, and muttering. The door opens and in steps someone else, someone that isn't Dr. Childless, but is familiar to Donald. Professor Bollington. Donald instantly sits upright and gasps. He can't believe it. He mutters again and again, "How can you be here? You died! How can you be here? You died!" Bollington instead just smiles and laughs. "I didn't die. Don't feel so feeble and stupid. Now, I am the master, and you will obey me." Donald shakes his head, and in pain he can't submit. He won't submit. The master then hands him a pistol and says, "Either you obey me, or you in a fit of madness try to take my pistol and you kill yourself." Donald gasps for air. He's confused, and then he sees Katie in the corner of his eyes, and he whispers, "I'm sorry, Catherine." He then takes the gun and shoots himself. The master begins laughing, and then he leaves the cell, closing it behind him. The camera pulls away from Donald just lying there, and the end credits begin. The music uses Never Let You Go by Florence and the Machine. Here, the master would be retroactively made to be Professor Bollington from Series 3 of Leftover, mainly so Jason Isaacs could be the master. The Ice-Up Galaxy has gone through turmoil over the past few hundred years. After the war, the planets have become barren wastelands, and that's just the lucky ones. But they're all surviving, things are getting better, stations are being rebuilt, but there's a power vacuum, and an outsider is trying to take hold of the galaxy for his own personal gain. You will obey him. You will obey him. This story focuses on the newest incarnation of the Master, the Jason Isaacs Master, the one we just met in Downfall. The events of this episode are completely unrelated to Downfall, though it assumes that this takes place sometime after Downfall. We see the Master take control of power throughout the Ice-Up Galaxy. Some people oppose, but eventually he manipulates them and gets what he wants. He uses several different individuals and destroys their lives. Without the Doctor there, the Master gets exactly what he wants, and by the end of the episode, he has control of the whole galaxy. Nothing in the universe can stop him now. And honestly, nothing can. We end the episode with the Master sitting on a giant throne on a spaceship, looking over his empire and smiling. And then the music begins, and soon after the end credits, the music used is Run Run Away by Slade. So that's Cold Front Series 1. What did you think? Comment down below. Are you excited for Series 6 of Panopticon next? Now you've got a bit of an indication of what was going on in that season, don't you? Until the next time, goodbye.